Hello, I'm Sidney Katz, a District 3 representative on the Montgomery County Council. I'd like to invite you to join me today with a conversation with Bob Buchanan, who's the chair of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation Board of Directors. That's coming up next right here on County Cable Montgomery.
Today's No Boundaries travels to downtown Rockville and Ev and Maddie's restaurant. Owned and operated by Patrick and Eunice Pack, Ev and Maddie's serves up delicious, freshly prepared dishes using locally sourced ingredients. It was the perfect spot for Montgomery County Councilmember Sidney Katz and Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation Board Chair Bob Buchanan to meet up, discuss ideas, and, as it turned out, share personal histories.
And really, Ev and Maddie's is a place that is a wonderful restaurant, and it's named for their children, which is most appropriate because this makes it a family business, and you and I both have family business backgrounds. So I appreciate you being here, and I know that No Boundaries is to discuss people who are not necessarily in the Montgomery County government, but certainly have great influence over the Montgomery County government. And if anyone has that, that is certainly you, as being the new, and I guess you'll be called new for many years now, but the new president of the Board of Directors of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. So thank you for being here.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. We had our first birthday, our first year anniversary for the board of the MCEDC, Montgomery County Economic Development Corp, just this week. And we're learning a lot, but with our new CEO, David Petter, we're very comfortable that we're scaling up in a good manner. So hopefully you'll see some changes that are very proactive about pro-business needs and initiatives for the county.
Well, you know, in my background, I actually come from a small business, and I know your background is, your business was a little larger than mine, but my grandparents came to Montgomery County close to 100 years ago. I was talking about this yesterday. And my grandfather's twin brother had a store in Rockville, and then his twin brother was drafted in the war, in World War I. And then my grandfather, after his brother came back, decided they shouldn't be in competition. So my grandfather went all the way to Gaithersburg, so of course they wouldn't be in competition. and I ran that, yeah, absolutely. And I ran that store for pretty much, it was in existence for 95 years. My parents gave it to me, and my two older brothers they would work in the store from time to time, but not to the degree that I did, obviously. But I know that your background, that you were involved in your father's business.
Well, before I do that, because I think we probably had similar backgrounds and how we were to learn the business, what were some of the tougher jobs you had in your father's store?
Well, I had every one. I actually got to sweep the floor. I don't know that I actually swept the floor at home, but I swept the floor at the store, I can tell you. We did everything. And in a small business, and we had outside help as well over the years, sometimes more than other years. But in a small business like mine, you did everything. You swept the floor, you bought the goods, you sold the goods, you rang up the goods, and you did it all. And so it really has been a great background for me to appreciate everybody's occupation.
So I'm smiling because my father was a home builder, and in fact, I'm a third-generation developer. And when I was a teenager, he thought it was important that I learn the home building business from literally digging the ditches for the foundations up. So I spent summers digging ditches or carrying bricks or hods for the masonry people, and then when I graduated to be an assistant superintendent, I was a big day.
Oh,
but
wow.
I made all of $10 an hour, and no one knew I was a boss's son, and he wanted me to know what a man could do in a day. There weren't too many women in the real estate business then, but it was a great learning experience because of, one, learning how to manage a difficult task and being reasonable, because you had to have the men want to do the job and do it well. So my father had been fortunate enough to go to the Wharton School during the Depression.
Wow.
And he really appreciated that. Didn't know how my grandfather managed to do that, but he wanted to pay back. And he didn't really know what he was going to do until in his junior year, professor comes in the fall and says, gentlemen, there's going to be a war. My job is to teach you to be captains of industry. So get to know each other, because you're going to work and help prepare the country for war, and then supply the country during war, and then after the war, help rebuild this country. Mm-hmm. They kind of looked around like, come on. Yeah. Turned out the guy next to my father was named Weyerhaeuser Lumber.
Sure.
Kohler plumbing fixtures was in front of him. A guy who ended up running GE Appliances was a row back.
Wow.
So my dad got into the home building business, and by virtue of his network from way back when, stayed with and connected to the business through the suppliers, if you will. Mm-hmm. And when he became president of the Home Builders Association in the 60s, he designed a muddy shoe tour, and it was a great example of how far ahead he was for his time, because he was trying to tell people, just because you ship it in a pristine condition from the factory, it doesn't mean it gets to me in a muddy field construction. You need to know how it works when it gets here. Yep. Long story short, he was a legend in his industry, and I never thought I could do it. I never thought I could have the passion for it. And I went into the Navy after college because he really wanted me to have public service and a sense of serving the country, which he had during World War II. And it was when my mother called and said, what are you going to do after the Navy? And Sid, I hesitated maybe 1 second. And she said, good, your father needs you, come back and join the family business. And my life's never looked back.
Well, you know, mine is not obviously identical, but there is some similarities. My mother did the books at our store from the time she was 12 years old until pretty much a year or so before she passed away. She had gotten very ill, and she wouldn't come into the store as often. But she did the books for from the time she was 12, and then her father sent her to Strayer's Business College, which was really not the usual, especially for a young lady in those days when she graduated high school. And because of that, you know, our world has changed. But my world really began to change because I hung around the store from the time I was 10. I don't know that I ever worked. I always told people I worked my mouth in there. I don't know how much I really worked, but from the time I was 10. But what did happen to me is my life changed because people realized that I should be getting involved in the city of Gaithersburg in those days, and it was really civic responsibility. So,
likewise, I moved back to the area. I became the civic president of our civic association. Testified on 1 or 2 issues that impacted our neighborhood. First time I'd been to the City Hall, Rockville City Hall, and one thing led to another, and I eventually ran for City Council. And it was more my sense of knowledge of the building and land use and how a community works from a developer's point of view, I think stood me in very good stead with the staff and the citizens of Rockville, because I was willing and to understand easier, perhaps, than some others that might be fooled by those devilish developers. So.
And that's why, in many cases, local government really becomes the place where people can get things done. I mean, you see each other in the grocery store, you see each other in your walks of life, and therefore people many times are much more comfortable telling you when something is wrong. So they also tell you when something is right, though they tell you something's wrong a lot faster in many cases.
I thought my experience in Rockville really benefited my business career because I appreciated what it took to make a community and to have that outreach. Yep. And as you know, when you're trying to get a big project approved, you need a lot of the neighborhood and the citizen support. And you got to deliver on that support. You got to deliver on what you're going to do, not only to comply with your permit, but also to keep the faith with the community. And I think my pride in learning that Rockville was an all-American city when I was there.
Right, sure.
And going through that process and learning all aspects. And I also think just in knocking on doors, running for election, you get to see people in their homes, you get to hear their problems or their issues, and you have an idea of what really are the important things versus perhaps what you thought.
Absolutely. There's many people who outside the room that comes and talks at the public hearings.
As this No Boundaries continues from Ev and Maddie's restaurant in Rockville Town Center, Montgomery County Councilmember Sidney Katz asks Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation Board Chair Bob Buchanan about an interesting hobby of his.
Bob, one of the things that I learned about you when I was reading your resume is that you and your wife are bird watchers. And you perhaps recall that I, when I was mayor of Gaithersburg, got to introduce you for some event. I don't remember the event, what event it was.
A small chamber meeting.
It was a small chamber, and that's exactly what it was, at a chamber meeting. And I said that in Montgomery County, to show how everybody gets along, that a Katz can get along with a bird watcher. It went over pretty well, thank goodness. Not all my jokes do, but anyhow, how did you get involved in bird watching? How did that work?
We went to Africa, a family trip to Africa. And one day we're sitting around the campfire talking about what animal we'd like to be or what animal we had seen that most impressed us. And of course there was a lion and there was a cheetah. Came to my wife's turn, she said, I want to be a lilac-breasted roller. People said, what in the world is a lilac-breasted roller? Well, it's a pretty fantastic bird with phenomenal colors. She went through a lot of teasing from the family, but we live along the river, and that would be her refuge. We were taking care of her mother, who lived with us for 11 years, and she would go out and bird for relaxation to get away from the house. And the image of that roller, looking for similar warblers or whatever that seek this area out during the migration times. So I learned that if I wanted to keep up with her, I better be a birder. Yeah. And as luck would have it, I had the ears, she had the eyes. Yeah. So that's how we paired up.
That works out. And I know that you've traveled extensively.
The nice thing about birding is you find out places in your own county, in your own region, that you didn't know existed, because you're going there for a habitat for a special bird or a special time, and you see how much phenomenal land has been conserved in this region. And I say the Chesapeake to mountain area. Yeah. And that led us to really appreciate the sense that special habitats were in unique places. So we've been able to go to places like Bhutan, Patagonia, Alaska, the Pribilofs, and other places where I normally would not have traveled. I think the morning or the evening I woke up to use the facilities. We were in the Himalayas at 13,000 feet, and over the night a herd of yak had surrounded our camp. And walking through the yak to get to the appropriate outhouse was something that
you would remember.
I remember.
Yeah, somehow you could. Well, you know, I've always joked that I'm somebody that believes you should never want to leave Montgomery County, Maryland. Now, I used to always say Gaithersburg, Maryland, but my horizons obviously have gotten my world has gotten much bigger. Worldly, absolutely. But I have, and my wife disagrees with that, by the way. She certainly makes certain, Sally certainly makes certain that on occasion we do go to various places. I guess in my case, I've been to probably half the states, and have learned wherever I go that there's a city hall or a county office building that I like to go look at to see how they would be doing things. But part of my life is that I've really been very, very fortunate that because I grew up here, just like you did, you see people throughout the day. And my office staff always teases me. I talk about the bean aisle at the grocery store, because someone will come over to you at the bean aisle and tell you where there's a problem and where, you know, what needs to be done and what their suggestions are. And one of my great concerns, I appreciate them telling me, and I appreciate that my life is really so intermingled wherever I am that somebody will come over and chat with me for a variety of reasons. But one of the concerns is if they hadn't seen me in the bean aisle, would that problem have gone away? And it wouldn't have. So I always encourage people to please let all of us know what goes on, and I'm assuming you have a lot of that in your life as well.
I think the thing that's maybe been different for me is I have been all my life, I guess starting in the 80s, been very much involved in public-private partnerships. And the nice thing about those public-private partnerships were to learn how to respect and trust the person who's normally would not be in your world, right, not be on the bean aisle. Yeah. And I remember one time I was doing a project in Arlington, and we were concerned about the lighting of sidewalks, and they were trying to encourage connectivity and people being outdoors, and the development community was doing and complying as best they could, but the street lights were of a major highway variety and cast a blue hue on everybody as they walked around. And long story short, we went downtown to see why the mall was so conducive to people walking at night in the evening, and had a glass of beer or wine or two with some of the public officials, along with the designers and the architects, and we looked at each other and we realized we were all after the same thing. We wouldn't have done it together unless we wanted to make it better. And when you get to that point and people aren't fighting each other or telling you things and then not being around to help solve them, that's when you know the community's working.
Absolutely. One of the real positives that I've had in my life is because of government, I actually got involved in things I normally wouldn't have gotten involved in. In fact, I've read newspaper articles that I probably would have never even read the headline one. I mean, I was not interested in zoning unless it happened in front of my house or next door to me. And because of my involvement in the city, it really opened my eyes to that. And that's why I've often thought that the charrette process for planning is a good way, because people actually sit down and they don't necessarily have to agree, and probably you're better off if they don't agree in the very beginning, but it gets you there. But I also say that the reason I became involved in the city of Gaithersburg was because a good friend of the family suggested that I do that. I was 26 when this happened. I had just I'd left I'd been the president of the local Masons chapter, the Prince Alpha Masonic Lodge. They call the president Worshipful Master. And I had just left the East. And a person who was a good family friend, a former principal of Gaithersburg Middle School, Gaithersburg Junior High in those days, Carol Kearns, came in and said, "Sidney, you should get involved." And Sidney, Mr. Kearns was a wonderful man. Sidney saluted and did it, and thank goodness he did that, because he really changed my life. Did you have an experience similar to that?
Mine was a little bit different. Mine was, I was representing a project we were trying to get approved in the city, and went to a planning commission hearing with a team of engineers, architects, and the normal retinue there to answer questions that I might not be able to. And make a long story short, we never got heard that night because someone did not want that project, which was an addition to an existing project, to move forward. So he delayed and delayed and delayed to the point where they couldn't take any new business that evening. Next morning, my father says, "How'd it go last night?" And I said, "It didn't. We didn't get hurt." And he was surprised, then mad, then took action, and he called his friend Mayor Tuckton, then mayor of Rockville,
absolutely,
and said, "What in the world is this going on there? Do you know this has happened?" And the mayor was very surprised, shocked, and very disappointed that this had happened yet again to a project that it shouldn't have. And he told my father, "I'd love to have someone replace that certain council person because he's done this once too often." My father immediately told him he had someone in mind, and would he teach him the ropes. He hung on the phone, and I said, "Who are you going to put? Who do you have in mind?" He said, "You have a meeting with the mayor this afternoon." That was my introduction.
And the expression, "The rest is history." Right? That's right. That's great.
It was a great lesson of civic responsibility as well, because as a developer, I had to prove that I was fair-minded and understood the civic side as well as the development side. I learned a lot.
Final segment of No Boundaries, coming to you from Ev and Maddie's restaurant in Rockville Town Center, the conversation continues between Sidney Katz and Bob Buchanan, chairman of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation Board.
Bob, one of the things that people talk about is the differences between government and business. And many times I've often heard people say that the government should be run like a business, but nobody ever says a business should be run like government. So, but I know that in your new role as the chair, what are your discussions, your thoughts on the new Economic Development Corporation and where we're headed?
Well, first of all, I'm far more focused on our region, because as the region goes, so goes Montgomery and
Absolutely.
Fairfax and whatever.
Absolutely.
And the region's under a lot of pressure from transformation going on, and certainly in the real estate business where suburban office markets are not what they used to be. Marriott saying they didn't want to stay in their office market as well positioned as we all thought it was. They needed to move to where the future workforce wants to live and work. So there's challenges to all of us, and yet we also have, I'll say, an image that's been tainted by the political gridlock. So how we attract and retain, in some cases retrain talent, is going to be very important to us moving forward. And I think Montgomery embraces its diversity and has a huge number of startup companies because of the federal government and because of the grants and the foundations, and they're smart and they want to live here. They want to work here. But I think our challenge will be, how do we enable that through a better transportation system, through a better housing affordability awareness, so that we don't rest on our laurels and think that everyone's just going to come because they always have. We're getting to be a pretty expensive place to live. We all know our metro woes are not going away. In fact, I mentioned to you there was another editorial in today's Post about the need for the regional leaders to stand up and start solving the regional problems. So it's daunting, but I think if we have good leadership, we'll get there.
Well, and of course, so much of it comes down to the financing and to the money itself. Our world has changed dramatically from the time that we were growing up here. I mean,
your retail world.
Absolutely.
I mean, you probably got out at the right time.
Absolutely, I did. And it wasn't as much fun either. I mean, but the brick and mortar store is a very different brick and mortar store from my grandfather's time, and to pretend that nothing has changed really doesn't keep you in business. So, but government and business and all the other segments need to blend together. I mean, not one segment can solve this, not one segment causes all these concerns, not one segment can get us out of these concerns.
And there are more segments involved, I'd say, Sid. Academia needs to be a part of the solution because they're training our workforce of tomorrow. We need to make sure they're tuned in and we're tuned in to what they can do and what the region needs. And the nonprofit in this region is very strong, and they're very concerned about the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. And everybody needs to be at the table to figure out how we're going to make it work. One thing I learned from your council discussions is the concern of the council of the small business entity in the county. How difficult it is for them to be aware of the opportunities and how can we help nurture their growth, because 92% of our job growth is going to come from those companies already here. We don't need to spend a lot of money going to various places around the world to bring, in the hopes to bring companies here. We need to nurture those companies that are here.
Well, I've often said that economic development is not, it's just like buying a car, you know, that someone will treat you so nicely when you're buying the car, it's how they service it afterwards. And it's the same thing for economic development, in my opinion. It's not just that we want to attract new people, new businesses to be here, and we do, but you also have to, you know, nurture and make certain that the people that are here, the businesses that are here, are growing as well. So it does need to be a continuing conversation, and in many cases, what I have found is that people really do want to work together, but everybody's so busy. Everybody is, you know, they're going to take care of whatever it is first, and then they'll get to the secondary concerns. But the secondary concerns many times overshadow the first concern.
And I think we're at the stage where the problems are so big, and the need for top-down decision-making, long-term regional perception is so great that some of the CEOs who normally want to have a low profile because they don't want to be seen as controversial or confrontational, their companies may be perceived differently in their mind. But I think now's the time for them to step up. We have good groups, we have good organizations, but we need the political will which they can help install by saying, I can't grow here. I can't keep my people here unless we have this changed or that improved.
Well, and to the CEOs, many times they're concerned about this quarter or last quarter. They're not concerned about, because if they're, you know, 10 quarters from now. And part of the problem with that is, in their mind, if they don't take care of this quarter, they're not going to be there for the 10th quarter.
Right.
And it goes back to the football coach that said, the future is now. It is, but the future also has to be the future. We need to make certain that there's the short term and the mid-term and the long-term solutions to this. We cannot continue, in my opinion, to have air traffic be so horrible that people find it difficult to get to work, but we do need to make certain that we have a rush hour. There are people going to work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's all of these types of things that we all need to roll up our sleeves and try to figure out the best solutions for a difficult issue.
I think we're at a tipping point, if you will, and Metro maybe is the catalyst for me coming to this conclusion. We let that fester far too long.
Yes, we did.
It's broken. Now people don't have confidence in it. If we don't show how we're willing and able to solve that as well as other issues, people are going to say, well, maybe this isn't the community I need to live in and grow into the future.
Well, and that there again is a type of planning that needs to be discussed. If you want a system, and it didn't run 24/7, but if you want a system that runs as long every day and every weekend as it can, and not plan any maintenance involved in that. I mean, there has to be time. You have to be able to fix these things. Not that I could fix these things. I'm not handy, but somebody needs to. And if you don't have the time to do that, it's going to break. If you don't invest in your maintenance, we're going to have problems, and that's what's happened. It's easy to delay it.
The dynamics are so different from when we were growing up here, Sid. Last night I was at 1333 H Street Northeast. An awards for the planners, and Montgomery County
Yes.
got an award
Yes.
last night.
Yes.
It was the Atlas Theater. I'll guarantee you, I've never been there before. Man, was it hopping. I mean, thriving. So much activity, I pinched myself saying, where have I been, And if Montgomery County isn't aware of the dynamics changing, we're going to be left behind. And no one wants to be second best. We need to really apply ourselves.
Well, and we do, and we are trying our best. I mean, Bethesda certainly is a happening place. Downtown Silver Spring is getting more and more active, where we are today, and downtown Rockville is certainly a thriving place. And I can tell you, as we are in Evan Maddie's, as we're going to close out this segment, that they're a proof of the fact that if you work hard, you can have a restaurant and be in a thriving
and
area.
they're right down the street. I'm giving a plug for my favorite organization, VizArts.
Oh, yeah,
right
absolutely.
up the street
Yes,
is
indeed.
VizArts, so come on down to Evan Maddie's and come up and see VizArts while you're here.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. It's absolutely delightful to have this chat. We probably one of these days should have a chat not on television, and we will continue to do that. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.